Hello, everyone. Welcome to Sandy McGear's number 8, I think it might be. And I'm with William again from Reactionary Reading Law. William, do you just want to say a bit about yourself and where you actually are today? Because I can hear it a little bit now.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I have an interest in legal and political strategy. At the moment, I'm on the top floor of a nightclub because the Wi-Fi in my house has gone. So, yeah, is that enough? Does that
Well, we
explain?
might have a bit of musical interlude then while we're
Yeah.
chatting. It might sort of waft in and out because I did catch a bit of that.
Yes.
Yeah, so this sort of second stream that we're doing has really come about because we had a bit of a contretemps. It wasn't really, was it? I was sort of very fired up about these 15-minute cities, low traffic neighborhoods that were popping up all around the country, and saying that essentially this has got to the point now where these people, these councillors, are acting ultra vires above and beyond the law that they are supposed to work within. And I was recommending that people start using their powers of citizens' arrests to start, I think we need to start taking a bit of a stand. And you went, no, we can't do that. So we're kind of coming at this from the standpoint of, I would like people to start using the powers that we have within the law. And you thought that wasn't a very good idea, and you've got some other ideas. So
Yes.
Let's start with, where do you want to start?
I'll start with citizens' arrest and briefly explain how that works, if you don't mind.
Yeah, that's a good start, yeah.
Right, so it is true that members of the general public have the power to conduct a citizen's arrest, provided that they believe that providing they can reasonably believe that someone is in the process of or has committed an indictable offence, so an offence that would go to the Crown Court. So a good example is theft, something like that. So if someone shoplifts something or is robbing a television from an electronics store, you can, within the law, provided you use reasonable force and you have reasonable grounds to believe they're committing a crime or have done, you can intervene with reasonable force.
Can I just interject there and ask a question? Because fraud is an indictable crime. And I am of the opinion, well, it's not really opinion, it is a fact, and we can sort of go into this a little bit into the conversation, that if we feel that fraud is being committed, does a citizen's arrest, can that also be performed to prevent a fraud from happening, which is also an indictable crime?
Right. Because fraud very rarely entails violence and physical action from people, I would generally caution against that and say that it's certainly not a good idea, and I'll explain why in a minute. The problem with conducting a citizen's arrest as a layperson or a member of the general public is if you use excessive force that a court deems to be excessive, you can get prosecuted or you can get sued civilly by the person you use force on. That's the first aspect. And also, within the powers of citizen's arrest, in the relevant legislation, which if people want me to go into, I'll go into. I haven't got my notes on me at the moment, but I will discuss it, the legislation, if you want me to. You have to, once you've made the citizen's arrest, bring the person immediately to a police station or to a magistrate. So I would generally say that a citizen's arrest is a very bad idea, because even if you see someone committing crime, because they could have a knife, they could use excessive force against you, and you could have to use excessive force and get yourself into trouble. So as a general rule, I would advise against conducting a citizen's arrest or trying to.
Okay, so going back to what is currently going on, I mean, there's sort of a big picture that was forming in my head when I was thinking about this. I was looking obviously at things that have been going on in France, and looking at how I've been saying for the past few weeks to people, about, because everyone's been going on about, let's, you know, burning these big planters that councils have put up at the ends of streets as barriers, and I've been saying no, because that's criminal damage.
It is.
Yeah, so I've been saying no, we don't do that. What we do is we use within the law, there's something called lawful excuse. And lawful excuse has been used really recently, actually, by Extinction Rebellion, and the judge waived any sentencing because their lawful excuse was that by what they were doing, and I can't remember exactly which demonstration this was, because there's been so many of them. But I do remember my ears prick up when I see the words legal or lawful in a newspaper report. Because when you know the difference, when you're tuned into the difference, it really leaps out at you. And I saw that they had got off on lawful excuse, and the judge had said, yes, lawful excuse. So I have been saying to people, you have got lawful excuse to move these barriers out of the way. So you're not destroying them and you're not damaging them, but what you are doing is moving them out of the way of the road. And your lawful excuse, and what struck me and what brought this into my mind was reading a story about how an ambulance was struggling to get around the road system because of these enormous barriers. So I said, you can use lawful excuse. We are preventing somebody from possibly dying in the back of an ambulance. And so that was why we removed these barriers. And actually recently, this week, there has been another newspaper story, I think it was a couple of days ago, where it's hundreds of ambulances have been stopped from driving people to hospital. These barriers have got in the way. So what I'm trying to sort of get across to people here is that there is something that is called lawful excuse, and that can be used in law if you can prove that what you did, as in action A, is going to prevent action B, which would have been a worse outcome from happening.
Yeah.
And that's how lawful excuse can be used. And I think people can reasonably use that, as long as they're not creating any damage to these barriers, they can use lawful excuse quite reasonably in a court.
This is going to depend on situation, because if you're in the specific situation where an ambulance is trying to get through to a house and you move the blockade so the ambulance can get in that very specific scenario, you probably will have the excuse of lawful excuse, because otherwise someone could have died. So in the case of an ambulance, and you allow an ambulance to get in, it is possible and maybe even likely that you would get off on the grounds of lawful excuse. However, once you start going to other places that are different to that specific situation, such as you just move one to get past, then I think the lawful excuse, from everything I know about lawful excuse and how it's been applied, would be quite different. If I may move on to Extinction Rebellion and why Extinction Rebellion, or at least in my opinion, have been able to use lawful excuse, it's going to tie into the Simon Dolan case, which I've got an article on my Substack, so check that out after you finish watching this. I think in regard to Extinction Rebellion, it's going to matter that most of the elites are under or believe themselves to be under the impression that the world's going to end in 10 years. So I'll tie that into the Simon Dolan case.
So they're kind of using lawful excuse themselves in a way, even though they're not calling it.
Yeah, I'll just move on and explain in depth what I mean. During the Simon Dolan case, one of the judge's points was that the COVID policy was rational because asymptomatic transition was making the virus more contagious than ordinary viruses. That's what was admitted into evidence and given in evidence by the government, and the judge accepted that. And I think there'll be very similar reasoning with regard to Extinction Rebellion, because Extinction Rebellion, if they were on trial for obstructing a public highway, could say, we are obstructing a public highway, but if we don't raise awareness on climate change, the world in 10 years' time will be set on an unmovable path of climate catastrophe. And because there is a wealth of academic literature that would back them up in that, they could potentially use the excuse of lawful excuse. And I don't think it really matters, given what's happened with COVID, that the academic research isn't worth the paper it's been written on. So,
sorry, carry on.
So that is why I think Extinction Rebellion have been able to get away with what they've been able to get away with.
I absolutely agree. And this is where we're going to start getting into the weeds a little bit, I think, because, I've known for a while, I haven't read the papers myself, but I've heard, have you heard of the website, What's Up With That?
No, I haven't.
Okay, well, he's very good at calling out this. Apparently we've got 99% of, I don't know what the real figure is, 90-something% of scientists across the world agree that we've got global warming or climate change or whatever they've decided to call it this week, and the world's going to end in 10 years' time, despite the fact that they said this 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and 30 years ago, and we're still here. So this morning, I was listening to Neil Oliver's fantastic GB News rant that he has, his regular rants, and he was saying, now I've listened to two actually over the past couple of days, so I think it might have been this morning's one. He was saying how they came up with that figure is they consulted X amount of scientists across, various scientists across the world, various countries, and it was a very small number of scientists that agreed that the world was going through this climate change and we were all going to die or freeze or whatever. And the biggest proportion of scientists said that they'd looked at the evidence and they weren't sure either way. So really, it wasn't a yes and it wasn't a no. And then there was another couple of groups of scientists. I think one very tiny group said no, it wasn't, leading to climate catastrophe. And I can't remember what the other group was. But what they did was they took out this biggest group of scientists that said, well, we don't know either way. And I think what they were saying is we need to do some more research. But they said, we don't know either way. We haven't got an opinion on this because there isn't enough evidence out there. They took that enormous chunk, the biggest chunk of people out, the biggest chunk of scientists out of that consultation, and they sort of chucked them away. So then they were left with what they decided was this mass of scientists, and that's how they got their 90+% of scientists, because that's basically all that was left in the group.
Yeah.
So this kind of constitutes fraud, and fraud, which is another aspect of.
I would argue it doesn't amount to fraud.
Really?
Then you couldn't. If
they've deliberately hidden data, then surely that's fraud.
Not in the sense of the general sense. It depends what you do with that hidden data. For example, if I pitch a company to someone and I hide my financials, first of all, I wouldn't get investment anyway unless the person was stupid. But we'll assume someone does give me investment. If I hide my financials, and my financials are that I'm hemorrhaging money all the time, that's fraud because I lied to get money. That's the general definition of fraud.
But that's also what they're doing, isn't it? Because by hiding this data, by junking this data that didn't serve their cause, they have acquired money for the climate change cause, and quite a lot of that money is coming from taxpayers like us who are paying green taxes on things like flights and our energy bills. And I don't want to get bogged down into flights and energy bills. The point I'm making is that quite a few people in quite a few areas, including COVID, where they also hid data, and Pfizer particularly, and that is going through the courts in America at the moment. When people are hiding data deliberately because it doesn't fit the narrative, then that surely they have to be held to account for that, don't they?
They do, and it will depend on the case and the specific facts of the case, because if you were to have, let's say, a wind farm or a university lie and fudge data so they can get more money off the government, then maybe that university could be prosecuted for fraud. However, it's a fact-specific thing. I mean, if it's the case that whatever university we're on about is just following the narrative and the scientific consensus or perceived scientific consensus, then it'd be very hard to bring prosecution for fraud against an individual or an institution, because it's very hard to prove that someone's lied in a complex situation like that. Because if you would say prosecute an individual for lying to get more money out of grants for science, he could say, okay, but I'm not lying. I admitted this data because everyone else admitted this data who's done a study on that. And in a court situation, he would probably be found innocent or acquitted because everyone else is doing it. So it's very hard to prove that something is BS and that someone knows it's BS or knows it's untrue and a lie if they have so many other people touting the lie.
I find that really, I don't know if that would that hold up in a court of law? I did it because everybody else was doing it. Yes. Which really is what that sounds like. Surely we all have a moral compass, and if you know that something is wrong and you just went along with it anyway, I mean, it's a little bit like a group of bank robbers sort of creating this plan to rob a bank or rob a jeweler's, and let's say like 10 of them hatch this plan and a couple of them are just the sort of, the lower down the rungs bits of the gang. They would still be classed as accomplices to this. They wouldn't get away with it. They wouldn't be able to say, well, I went along with it because they were all doing it.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very specific scenario, which is very different from the issue we had with COVID and the issue we've got with the climate stuff. To some extent, in some legal cases, especially in torts for personal injury, when with regard to hospitals, the defense, everyone else was doing it, does actually hold up. It's called the Bolam test, and it is essentially that if there is a body of evidence that suggests that a particular medical practice is the correct thing to be done, even if the majority of medical practitioners disagree, someone cannot be found to be negligent. And a similar thing exists in finance within trustee duties. So if you're a trustee of a fund or whatever, and you look after someone's pensions, if you put money and follow the market and do what a reasonable trustee
you went then
investor
you went Daleki. Can you repeat that?
Can you still hear me?
You broke up for a while though. Can you just go back to a couple of sentences?
Okay, so with regard to trustee duties, so we're going to be on about a pension.
It's done it again. You've broken up again. Oh no, you've gone totally Dalek now, William.
Violating trustee.
You've gone totally Dalek, and I can't hear you at all. Oh no.
And that science.
Can you hear me?
Scientists, and they choose. Yes, I can.
You've
And they
just gone. I
choose
just
to.
missed all of that. I've just missed all of what you said.
Okay, hang on a minute.
I don't know what's happened to your microphone.
Can you still hear me? Okay, can you
I
still hear
just
me
heard
now?
you say, "Can you still hear me?" But yeah, again, I missed most of what you said before that because it's just your mic's cutting out.
Okay, that's annoying. I'll take my mic out and use my computer mic, see if that's better.
You've muted yourself now, I think.
Can you hear me now?
Are you there?
Okay, right, I'll put my mic back in.
I can hardly hear you though, so you're going to have to turn yourself up.
I'll put my mic back in. Right, can everyone hear me now?
You're very, very quiet.
Hello?
That's better.
Okay.
Right. Right, carry on. We'll see how we go.
Right, so did you hear the Bolam test bit, which is for medicine?
I heard you mention something about trustees.
Right, okay. In law, especially medical negligence law, there's this thing called the Bolam test. The Bolam test is the idea that medical practitioners can be exempt from negligence if their practice was practice that other reasonable doctors would do, even if it's something that most doctors wouldn't do. And there's a similar thing with trustee duties. Within the Trustee Duties Act, I forget the specific act, I apologise, but generally, if trustees of a trust, so take the example of a pension fund, are investing in a way that is responsible and in line with the market, if they lose all the money or all the trust assets because of bad investment decisions, even if they know or they could be argued to know that the investments were bad, what will happen is that pension fund won't be liable for losing your money.
But that kind of relates to the law of contract, where both sides have a discussion, you know what's what on both sides of that contract before you sign. So you almost sign to say, yes, I understand that there is a risk involved and that I may lose all my investments. So that's quite clearly laid out in that law of contract at the start, isn't it?
Yes, but with the law of contract, you also have, in regard to financial services, you also have other protections as well that are regulatory and legislative. And if someone does lose your money as a result of incompetence and acting in a way that would be unreasonable, that other people wouldn't act, even if you accept there's a risk, you don't accept that there's a risk that someone, I don't know, who's investing your money for you is going to blow it on cocaine and hookers. So you would have, or you expect that a person is reasonably knowledgeable and they don't know anything and they lose your money. So there is protections that go beyond the law of contract for people who invest their money with.
Yes, of course there is. But although these days I would expect nothing less than for them to blow it on cocaine and hookers, to be honest, because such is the standards of our public life these days.
Yes.
Which kind of takes me sort of halfway around the circle, I think, because we've sort of strayed into sort of civil law, private law, and I kind of want to bring it back to public service, our so-called representative democracy. And I've dragged out a load of stuff from my old law degree, and I just wanted to read a couple of really quick things and see what you think, and then refer to the Nolan principles of public office, and go back to what we were talking about, or what I'd like to see happen. So first of all, I'm going to read a very, very short couple of sentences from one of my old Open University law books on rights, and it's Rules, Rights and Justice, an Introduction to Law. And this bit is moral and legal rights. And it says here, traditionally, rights have been seen in two ways: as moral or natural, in inverted commas, sorry, in brackets, moral or natural rights, and as legal rights. There is a vast literature in both law and philosophy on both these terms, but put very simply, moral rights have four main features. And the one that I'm pulling out from the four that they've, actually, no, I'm going to read out all four. So number one, they are natural in that they exist by virtue of our humanity. That's what I would probably call common sense. Number two, they are universal, as in everyone has them, regardless of where they live or what sort of society they live in. And actually, I'm going to scrap number three and go straight to number four. They are inalienable. They cannot be given up or taken away. Now, then it says, in contrast, legal rights, so these are legal rights as opposed to moral or natural rights. One, legal rights are artificial. They're created by governments. And two, they apply only to people within that particular society. Now, the second thing that I want to read really quickly, which links to that, is something titled "The State Can't Set You Free." And this is from another one of my law publications. And it's this tiny bit here. And it says about the state, basically. Although the jurisdiction has so persistently refused to define our rights, it also has been the most assiduous in upholding them. This is because, and this is the killer point, this is because it recognizes that rights define the limits of power and that these limits must be enforced by the citizen himself through the procedures of justice rather than by the state. And that kind of encompasses, if you like, what I've been banging on about for most of this morning on Twitter, which is we've taken our eye off the ball. We are ultimately responsible because we are supposed to keep these people in check, and we haven't done that. And this ball is now careering down God knows whatever pathway. And because these people who presume authority over us seem to have completely ditched their moral compass and seem to be using us as their playthings, I think it's up to us to put them back on track. And that is why I'm quite keen on people exercising their powers of citizens' arrest. And it's not that I'm advocating for people to rock up at their local council and go, right, I'm arresting you because blah, 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 blah. Not advocating that at all, because that would be foolish. But
okay, brilliant.
What I'm advocating is people doing proper training, doing proper research, understanding how to go about performing a citizen's arrest. And what I'm hoping is that we only have to do this in a couple of places around the country before word gets out on the grapevine that we are holding these people to account. It's more about sending a message and saying, we are onto you. You're not listening to us. You're ignoring, not only are you ignoring our rights and our inalienable rights as human beings who should be able to go about our lawful business without all of these hindrances and fines and threats and menaces. And I'm going to pull out something from, there's another one of, sorry, William, another one of my law books here called An Introduction to English Legal History. And I discovered, whoopee-doo, something called economic torts. And what these barriers on these roads are creating in London, in Oxford, in Canterbury, I think in Kent, various places. There are 100 cities in Britain, apparently, that have signed up to be 15-minute cities. Now, these are causing economic harms to people, and economic harms ultimately are going to lead to other harms. And this takes me back to lawful excuse and why we have to show them who's the boss. We've forgotten, and they've forgotten, that they are there to represent us and to assist us in our lawful existence in this country. They are not there to hinder us. And just to quickly finish, the 7 principles of public life, these are the Nolan principles from 1995.
Keyword principles.
Let's get into let's deconstruct that in a second. But so quickly, the 7 principles of public life. This is what they're supposed to have in their minds when they apparently represent their local residents. Selflessness, integrity, objectivity, accountability, openness, honesty, leadership. And what has happened in Oxford particularly, and I talk about Oxford because I still have a flat there, and so I feel like I've got one foot in the Oxford camp still. They were not open and honest with the public in Oxford. Again, this goes back to hiding data. They hid facts and data from the public before they did the consultation that they said they were going to ignore the results of if it didn't go the right way. And now they've imposed these barriers on these streets. What has happened is we have to put these people back in the hierarchy of where they need to be. They have flipped it all, and they seem to think that they are now above us, and they're not. They represent us. We employ them. They are our employees, and they are hindering us from living our normal lives. So what are your thoughts on what that was quite a lot to digest, sorry.
Yeah, don't worry, I'm used to digesting that amount of information. I'm a law student. I can cope. In terms of the Nolan principle or principles, it's principles. They're not legally enforced. And if you read my Substack and if you've met me before, you'll probably know that I expand the view that anything that doesn't have violent or coercive powers behind it is just an idea. So if you break the law, you get fined, and if you refuse to pay the fine, eventually they'll put you in prison. That's law.
You're right, because it does say guidance. This is on the government's own website, and it says guidance, the 7 principles of public life. So absolutely, totally.
They have no legal basis.
No,
so quite frankly, it doesn't matter if politicians or public servants uphold the Nolan principles, because what's going to happen to them if they don't uphold them? Nothing.
Well, exactly right. So what can we do? Because it seems that voting doesn't work. People in Oxford voted against these barriers being put in, and the council did as it said it was going to do, which is ignored the consultation. Now, I know the consultation isn't legally binding as well, so it's more a sort of procedural tick box exercise. But however we put it, whichever way you sort of swing this is they are acting against the interests of the people who they're supposed to represent.
Yes. Right. Can I go on to economic torts? Because this is something that may bear fruit. Normally in situations like this, when barriers are obstructed, well, this doesn't happen often, but normally when the council puts something that may cost your business money, normally they pay you for your inconvenience. And the reason for that is if you're carrying out lawful business and the council or whoever obstructs it, especially for a period of time or permanently, you're entitled to some compensation for that. So it could work that loads of Oxford residents who have businesses sue the council because the barriers are costing them money. that may work.
When
But
you say sue the council, I am much more of an advocate of suing individuals, because I think it's time that we started to make this personal, so that the actual councillor, whose name I can never remember, the actual councillor at Oxford City Council, who said that it was his idea. I think it was his bill or whatever it's called in council terms. I can't remember, but he is the one that said, we're going to do this anyway, even if they vote against it. So I am more of an advocate of suing an individual, because I think you're more likely to get some kind of remedy rather than suing a legally constructed person, as in a council body, the body of the council, if you like.
I would agree with you. For example, if someone were to libel me, I would sue them personally, as well as the organisation they work for. However, you can't really sue an individual who works for a council when the council has done something wrong. So it does work in a similar way to limited liability companies. However, it depends on the tort. So if a member of a local council were to libel you, so say that you're a paedophile when you're not a paedophile, or say you're a terrorist when you're not a terrorist, you could sue the individual. But for the general action of the council that the council has voted on or done through a specific process, such as erecting the bollards, you wouldn't get away with suing the person. You'd have to sue the council.
Could you not get away with? Could people not get away with suing the individual that openly said, we will ignore the results of the consultation?
No, you can't.
You can't, even though an individual has expressly said that. You
yeah, it may come up in a legal case if you were suing the council, because it would come on reasonableness and proportionality. Is if you're suing them for the amount it cost your business in terms of the bollards, the council saying they are ignoring it is proof that the council didn't take reasonable steps to make the erecting of the bollards something that would be reasonable.
And also hid the data as well. They were not open. Now I know we're going back to something that's only guidance and not law, but they have. I know the fraud thing is quite woolly in this regard, possibly, but if a council has knowingly withheld data and information from the people, again, I keep going back to the people they're supposed to represent, because I think that's really important, that we keep hammering home this idea that they are our representatives, and they're supposed to represent our interests, not their interests or somebody else's interests. If they have knowingly kept information from the public before the public voted, or even before the public voted, even if there wasn't a vote, if they've knowingly kept information from the public, isn't that committing? It's committing something. Whether I don't know whether it's fraud. What would that be termed?
It's generally not fraud, and there's not much you can do about it, because governments implement policies and ignore data or don't release it all the time. Unfortunately, it's part of governments. I don't agree with that. I would like it to change, but it is what it is.
So where are we left? I mean, really, the two key things, the two key arms of the law that I think we can work within as responsible,
sensible.
I don't like calling myself a citizen, because I don't feel I'm a citizen. I'm a human being within a group of human beings. And again, going back to Neil Oliver, he said something really important this morning, which is responsibility, and we are responsible for surely if we can see that harms are being done, we have to take on that responsibility, because we are part of a society. And I think we can use lawful excuse and citizens' arrests carefully. Citizens' arrests, not mass bonkers going up and arresting whoever you like.
I saw a video of that on YouTube Shorts of some boomer trying to arrest a police officer. It was the funniest thing I've ever seen.
But you know what? I saw that as well. And what I found really interesting, what I took from that was the way it was a policewoman, wasn't it? It was a lady police officer,
Yes.
I think. What I found really interesting was the way that she walked away rather than so I'm not saying that he was doing it in a proper way. I think the way he was doing it was incorrect. But the fact that he was saying that he was going to perform a citizen's arrest, and the fact that she didn't go to arrest him, I thought that was very interesting. She basically walked away from that situation. Yeah. And he was actually really right not to pursue that, because that goes back to what you were saying, as in, I mean, I don't even think he was performing.
You can't citizens arrest police officers.
Why not?
It's implied within the act. It doesn't say explicitly, but it's implied within the act.
Well, if it's only implied, then surely that's guidance.
No. So the implied nature of what is in primary legislation can be taken and enacted as law. So the best example is, I forget the individual case, but it was a public highway case, and it was implied with the legislation that it meant any vehicle using the road, but the word used was specifically carriage. And this act is still in force. Carriage was expanded to mean motor vehicle. So you can take...
Did you say parish was expanded to include motor vehicle?
No, carriage.
Oh, carriage, sorry.
Sorry, that's probably my dodgy mic. But yes, things that are implied within legislation can be enacted as law or dealt with by the courts as law. And
isn't that a matter of interpretation, though, again?
Yes, it's statutory interpretation.
Exactly, so it is interpretation, yeah. And they obviously will interpret it to suit themselves, obviously.
Yes, of course.
What happens then to the police are the people and the people are the police? Because if that is the case, and the police...
It's not the case.
It isn't the case now.
No, of course not.
Well, that was how the police were created as a force under Pelian principles, is that they were just us in and the only reason they had a uniform on was so that if you were out in the wilds of London town at night, then you could easily recognize somebody that could come to your aid. That was the only reason that they ever wore a uniform. They were just easy to spot, but they were us. Yeah. They were us, but with a uniform on.
Yes, I mean, this is what I don't like. I mean, what annoys me most about the idea of policing by consent is there is no consent. If
elaborate on there is no consent.
Well, the best example is where I grew up on the Isle of Man. During COVID, they were putting people in prison for breaking COVID restrictions. It was a 2-week prison sentence, then a 4-week, and so on. You had this swimming group of open water swimmers who got arrested trying to say, oh, I don't consent, I don't consent.
Well, and that's because they used the wrong wording. What they should have done is said to the police, you do understand that this is guidance, not law. Because that's how so many people have managed. Pardon?
No, in the Isle of Man, there was a specific bill passed that said that the courts have the power to imprison people for breaking lockdown.
Right, because in England it was guidance.
Yes,
it was literally it was only guidance, which is why Boris Johnson now over Cakegate is saying, but this was guidance, because obviously they knew it was guidance. Yeah.
To what extent this will stand up in court, I don't know. But what I'm trying to get at here is you don't consent to being arrested. The police officers, the police are, I don't like using the word thugs, but I'll use it, are the thugs of the state, there to enact the will of the state in regard to people who breach the law. I am all for using the law to violently oppress paedophiles because they're paedophiles. However, and to some extent, I mean, if you've read The Populist Delusion, you'll know this, the state must have and must use violence to enact its will at some point. You do not have policing by consent. You have policing with some kind of checks and some kind of balances. But the fact still remains, the police are the enforcement arm of the state.
I totally get that, and I agree. And ultimately, we sort of covered this before on the previous live stream, didn't we? Where
Yes.
ultimately those people with the force will use that force against you, whether it's legal or whether it's not legal. And we know that various things have happened that are completely unlawful. But interestingly, you said that, because, and I have kept the article, but it's on some kind of, I don't know where it is. It's in the wilds of my various laptops that I've had throughout the years. But a few years ago, again, this was in the mainstream news, and it was a chap had his door battered in by the police. I can't remember if a warrant was involved, but essentially, what caught my eye from this newspaper article was he sued the police and he won his case against them. And the thing that caught my eye was the police admitted that this man had not consented to being treated by, I mean, I'm using the word treated, but the man had not consented to this action by the police. And I thought, wow.
I don't know what that means. I'd need to see the article and read the
I
whole
know.
thing.
I'm going to see if I can pull it out from somewhere, because I read that and thought, because I'm with you. I'm with this idea of policing by consent. They say it the same as they say they're public servants and then do what the hell they like. But that article, that particularly made me sit up and go, oh, that's interesting. So I'll see if I can find it. I won't be able to find it on the internet. They probably buried it somewhere now, which is why I copied it and saved it.
Well, send it to me and I'll send you a take on it.
Yeah, I'll see if I can hunt it out. It's going to be, well, God knows where it's going to be now, but it is somewhere. So what recourse do we have? Because I think we're in a real pickle, I think, in this country, and to put it mildly, that we are being ruled over. They're not supposed to be ruling over us. They are supposed to.
No, they are. It's how things always have been, and things always will be. You will always have a hierarchy on top who are in charge. The reason
so what I'm suggesting with the whole lawful excuse thing is that I don't want to see some kind of violent insurrection in this country. I don't want to see us having any kind of violent revolution, any kind of civil war, any kind of, I mean, it feels like a tinderbox on some days, and they seem to be just turning the thumb screws on people more and more and more, and sticking two fingers up to people more and more and more, and piling more misery upon everybody, and using intimidation, which again is unlawful. So if we don't want it to get to that point, then I do think that it's up to us to hold these people to account, working within the law, using lawful excuse and citizens arrest and whatever other means we have, because I think we're on borrowed time at the moment, and I don't want to see it kicking off. But all they need, I mean, they know how to react to violence, and they know how to react to criminal damage. And what I see, I mean, with the ULEZ cameras in London, you know, you see people that have some people have smashed them in, some people have cut the wires. Now that can be seen as criminal damage.
Yes.
But other people have very cleverly stuck bags over them.
Yeah, that's a crime as well.
Well, I don't see, but if they're committing crimes against us, then we must have some kind of recourse, surely.
Local authorities have the power to implement cameras, do that type of thing within the numerous versions of the Local Authorities Act and Local Government Act. But in terms of things like that, there isn't really a single piece of action that individuals can take to stop that. This does not mean that we are without hope and we cannot take action. There is productive action that can be taken. The problem is it's just boring. I get the impression with a lot of people in our circles that they want a quick fix, something that is easy to do. But the problem is that doesn't exist. The things
I don't think it's even necessarily a quick fix. I just think that it feels like a game of cat and mouse. These people are toying with us. They can basically create any laws that they want using the legislature, it seems.
Of course they can.
And they have to dance to that tune. And
yes, we do.
that cannot be right. That cannot be right.
No, but it is right. It is how the system works. We have parliamentary sovereignty.
We go back to that sentence in this particular publication where it says, although this jurisdiction has so persistently refused to define our rights, it has also been the most assiduous in upholding them. This is because it recognises that rights define the limits of power, and that these limits must be enforced by the citizen himself. So it's recognised that we have the power to restrain those who would act ultra vires in law and go beyond what their remit is, essentially.
The problem is here, you're falling into the populist delusion, the democratic lie. The citizen does not have any power over the state that the state does not allow them. So a right without legal protection isn't a right. It's an idea that is at best a principle and an idea of best practice. It's not a right. I would define rights as privileges that are protected by the state.
I agree. I mean, basically, what I think you're saying and what I have felt for a long time is that we have a country, a system of laws, and what we are fed is a load of fraudulent nonsense, that we do not have any rights, that they can basically do what they like with us, which is all very well, and that may all be true, but if they keep doing this, then they cannot expect for there not to be any kind of pushback. It's almost like they're goading people into performing criminal acts that they can then arrest them for. But this is only going to end one way. If they don't listen and they don't represent us and they start making our lives extremely difficult. I mean, now they're trying to stop people from just driving around out of their own areas and down their own streets. And you can't behave like that and not expect some kind of pushback. And we are going to get to the point, if they know any history, they are going to get to the point.
Delusion.
And I'm not advocating violence. I don't like violence, but they're going to push people into violent acts against them.
Well, I think the state, especially our current elites, are very well versed in Schmitt, de Juvenel, Mosca, and other elite theorists. I mean, the current elites have basically internalized Carl Schmitt. So the idea that you have that there'll be some kind of revolution is a nonsense. It's not going to happen because the iron law of oligarchy is a thing. Who says organization says oligarchy. And if a bunch of random people start covering security cameras or moving bollards, that's not an organized movement. And if there was an organized movement to organize people into covering up cameras, bollards, and that type of thing, its leaders would be arrested, the organization would be banned, and no one would get involved. Have you read my article, The Thin End of the Wedge? The difference between hard and soft wedges?
No.
Okay. If there was an organization that was created for the purpose of organizing people to destroy cameras and move bollards, that would be dealt with as a hard wedge. So you'd arrest all the people involved who had committed that criminal damage. You'd also probably get the leaders for something else, terrorism or something like that. I mean, you probably could get them under the Terrorism Act. for organising people to do damage. So the leaders certainly would be arrested and put in prison. And what that would do is it would further demoralise people, and it would basically make it the case that people would find it impossible to organise. The same thing happened during the segregation era. People were forced to accept, by way of the National Guard, desegregation. There was an organised movement, but the organised movement was crushed by the National Guard, or the National Guard. So it really depends. You probably could do an organised movement that was designed to resist the current establishment, but it would be very difficult. And if you took one toe over the line, it would probably result in criminal consequences.
So what are you suggesting? Because we have to find a way out of the situation that we're in now, and it has to be, if we can't act within the law and make them change direction.
You can, on a limited basis.
Well,
so,
on a limited basis, and one that they will not take any notice of. I'm absolutely positive.
I'm a big believer in riding the tiger. There's nothing that we can do in the short or medium term that is going to change things for the present. So any action needs to be focused long into the future. For example, I think clearing out our current group of elites is going to take about 100 years.
Well, we haven't really got that long, William. So
no, I know we don't.
I haven't got that long, and I'm sure you haven't got that long either. So I totally get what you mean. I mean, this is a long-term thing. Ultimately, it is. But there has to be something in the short term. Not when I say short term, I don't mean next week or next year even. But surely within the next 5 years that we can encourage them to change direction.
Yes. I mean, we can push them into containment, and what we can do, if we organise in the right way, or if you as an individual take the right action. So what I'll say is, as an individual yourself, you're basically limited to writing complaints, maybe some judicial action if you can afford it, and making yourself anti-fragile. So there's nothing that can be done, in my opinion, to stop them bringing in digital IDs, central bank digital currencies. However, as an individual, and even as an organization, you can protect your own. So what you can do is you can start looking into having multiple residencies, multiple citizenships, multiple bank accounts, that type of thing. If you want to do that, check out a YouTube channel and a website called Nomad Capitalist, and they will go into a lot more depth than I can here. But as far as I can see, that is how you avoid the worst excesses of the tyranny of our current elites. For example, for myself, I didn't spend that long in lockdown because I fucked off to Sweden.
So how do we? Are you saying we cannot hold them to account in any way? Is that what you're saying?
In the short and medium term, no. You might be able to stop them teaching specifically vulgar SRE classes to your children.
Well, the thing is, this goes right back to what I was saying at the beginning, which is using the power that we have. And I'm not one of those people that says stand in your power, because I hate that. I hate the whole stand in your power crowd. Actually, no, I don't hate them. That's far too strong a term. I just find all this common law, stand in your power, and you sent me something earlier about these people that are trying to get out of
nonsense.
Bills. It is all a nonsense. It's like, look, if you're getting electricity and gas to your house, pay your bill. That's what you have to do. It's a service. You don't expect to phone up for a pizza and then have that pizza delivered and then say, I'm not going to pay you because we didn't have a contract. That's a load of nonsense.
But you do. You do have a contract if you order pizza.
You have a verbal contract. Yeah, but you know what I mean. And it's the same with these people, and they're trying to get out of paying their bills. It's like, no.
And fines and that.
Getting it, then you're paying for it. That's how it works. So
yes.
But I do think there are ways that we can use the powers that we have. And I've said a few times recently, why are parents still so for a start of this is what we've got into in this country. We've got into this idea that we have no power of our own and no authority of our own, and we've got a situation where parents think that legally they have to send their children to school and they have no choice, but actually they do have a choice, because it isn't legally you have to send your child to school. It's legally you have to make sure that they have an education, and that
you can homeschool.
Well, there's even a difference between homeschooling and home education. Those two things are also very different. They're two completely different things, and they are two different processes. And one can be monitored and looked at by the government, and another one can't be, or certainly shouldn't be. But anyway, we won't get into that at the moment. But we're in this situation. I think the reason why so much of this is going on in schools is because parents don't feel that they've got any authority to keep their child away, because of all the stuff that's happened recently with Gove bringing in his rules or laws or whatever it was a few years ago, saying you're not allowed to take your children out of school at term time. What has gone wrong, and what parents don't know? And I'm pretty sure that if you did a straw poll of parents with children tomorrow and said, do you know what in loco parentis means? I bet you barely any of them, if any of them, would know what that meant. None of them know that schools are there in loco parentis, and that they shouldn't be and mustn't be, and those are two legal terms as well, doing anything that you wouldn't be doing with them at home. So all of this nonsense about sex education, all it needs is a group of parents to get together and gen up on in loco parentis. Right. And we could have this nailed very quickly. We could have it nailed very quickly if parents just decided to keep their children off school and say, we're not sending our children to this establishment until you stop this. But we don't use our own authority. This is the problem.
Yeah. Can I talk about the issue specifically of schools, seeing as you brought it up?
Yeah.
I've got an article on my Substack where I go into the specific bits of legislation. It's titled No Outsiders, I believe. You can't withhold your child from school, because if you stop your child going from school during term time, you can get into trouble with the council and the truancy officers, and you can even have your children taken away from you. So I wouldn't recommend that. That's a bad idea. However, there are things that parents can do. And the key thing is to get out in front and act faster than they can. So you can write official complaints to the council and to the school. Make sure they're official complaints and politely worded, and they have to consider them. Also, in terms of SRE, schools are required to consult with parents to make sure you as a parent are involved in that. The key thing about complaints is, if you keep escalating it, a lot of the time, schools will give up in the short term because it's just too much effort, and that's what you want to do. If your child is in school and they're doing SRE, if you can withdraw your child legally from that SRE, please do. But the issue is, lots of SRE is mandatory.
Why can't we go down the in loco parentis route? Because they are not acting in loco parentis when they're doing this.
Can you just define in loco parentis for the audience, please?
I haven't got it up on my screen, but essentially in loco parentis, when the Education Act came into existence and parents were encouraged, not everybody sent their child to school, of course, because they were working in the fields or doing various other things. But in order to assuage any fears from parents, they basically created this in loco parentis. It basically means that while your child is at school, the school is acting as parent to your child.
Yes.
So they are taking your place as parent, and they're looking after that child's welfare.
That is the translation.
That's basically what it meant, that they would be you while your child was at school, to put it in a nutshell.
I certainly wouldn't say there's any harm in citing in loco parentis when making complaints to the school. But the issue I've got is, to a certain extent, the SRE and the garbage they teach in it is mandatory and it's required by law. So you'll be able to win victories on a proportionality basis.
What about safeguarding?
Yeah.
I've noticed that a couple of voices, I don't know the names of them, they might have been anonymous, but recently the issue of safeguarding around the SRE has come up.
Yes, it has. And I would mention that as well. There's no harm in it, because schools and institutions, especially that deal with children, normally get quite concerned when safeguarding is brought up, even if it's a nonsense. So when I was a kid, when I was about 8 or 9, I used to go to this thing called Play Outside. It was a charity-run initiative. It's basically they teach you how to do bushcraft activities, light fires, as that type of thing, tie knots. One parent complained that they didn't want their kids lighting fires and didn't think lighting fires was appropriate for children of the age group. And they stopped it because one person complained that they thought it was dangerous. So normally institutions, when safeguarding is mentioned, do listen. But the problem
so that's another angle that parents could come at this from then, is safeguarding. So they could quote in loco parentis and also mention safeguarding.
Yeah, just don't.
Which is a reason for why they would want to keep their child off school. So I know what you're saying about you can't keep your child off school, but if safeguarding is an issue, then obviously they could, because using lawful excuse, which is my favourite thing at the moment, they could say that they are doing. I mean, I'm just kind of throwing that in, but basically,
I'm not aware of a case of that happening.
No, I'm not aware of a case either. But they could say that they're keeping their child off school for safeguarding reasons, couldn't they? Yeah.
When discussing safeguarding with teachers, it's important not to make stupid comments. So if you say that you've got safety concerns with your child being around a person in the school, it's important that you, when thinking about that, acknowledge that every person by law who's regularly in contact with kids has to be DBS checked. So if you have someone coming into a school, they're not going to have not been DBS checked. So
that's a very good point, because maybe some of these people may not have been DBS checked, because I know that there has been at least one case where one of these people went into a school and it turned out that he was a paedophile. He was obviously, in order for them to say that or know that he was a paedophile, he must be on a list somewhere. So have they been DBS checked?
I would certainly check that. And
that's a very good question.
Yes, but normally they would have done. A school.
Oh, absolutely. Normally. These might be exceptions, though, because
they might be exceptions. And if they have, then you've got grounds for not allowing someone in front of your kids. But when doing the safeguarding thing, it's important that you don't make any stupid comments like accuse someone of being a paedophile, because that just gets
absolutely not. People have to be circumspect, and I do realize that some people are. The thing is, it's very easy for us to sort of sit here discussing this because we've got a background in law and legal stuff. So, but for a lot of people, they wouldn't even know where to begin. They wouldn't even know where to begin knowing what language to use and how to construct a sentence that couldn't be used against them even.
Well, generally, if you're making a politely worded official complaint, you've got nothing to worry about. Just don't make any aspersions that would be unreasonable. For example, if you have safeguarding concerns, which I would if I was lucky enough to have children, I would say, I acknowledge that such and such person has been DBS checked. However, I do have concerns about the topics they would be discussing and how that would introduce my child to certain areas
that they're not ready for yet.
Yes.
That I, as a parent, don't feel that they exactly. It's wording it in a very careful way. I mean, I'm not even sure if there are any. I mean, we've not come on here to sort of discuss parents and children today, but I do think that there must be. I know there's Us for Them, but I know Us for Them are kind of focusing on other things at the moment. There probably are one or two groups out there who are.
Christian Concerned is normally quite good.
Christian Concern, of course. Yes. Yeah, you're right. Yes. So well, we've been going for an hour and 10 minutes, would you believe? So I'd say we've got another 20 just to sort of wrap up, if you like. Do you think then, knowing what you were saying, going back to what you were saying about, in reality, they have might on their side, whether we're right or not, do you think there is any mileage in using lawful excuse and maybe performing some example, very careful citizens arrest to send a message?
Not really in terms of citizens arrest. And as touched on with the bollards, you're only really going to get away with the lawful excuse or you're only likely to get away with using lawful excuse if you're in a situation where an ambulance or someone's trying to be driven to hospital. That's the only reason you're going to get away with it. So in terms of that type of thing, I generally say it's a waste of time. What needs to happen is organisations need to be set up. But the problem is we don't have enough competent people to staff those organisations. I mean, I've seen.
Give me an example. Give me an example of what you've got. Give me sort of a model. A model example of what an organisation would look like that you're thinking of.
Well, I'll talk about the Free Speech Union and the Christian Legal Centre. In terms of employment law and free speech, those groups have done a very good job because it's far less common now as opposed to 5-10 years ago for people to be fired for something they say online about politics. And those groups deserve the credit for that because prior to those groups being founded, there weren't organisations that would help people take their employer to court. So those organisations...
Yeah, they are. I'm actually a member of the Free Speech Union. I think
so am I.
At work, yeah.
But certainly in terms of that type of thing, you'd basically need an organisation set up which could legally challenge every aspect of this process. So, for example, with the 15-minute city bit, you would need an organisation that could help people make legal actions in terms of nuisance and also economic torts, as you said, and also lobby the council as well and try and get political lobbying to say no.
That sounds
so you'd need
great.
A really well. Yes.
Yeah, so you think there is some mileage on the economic torts aspect of it, and probably there are other sort of things like
in other aspects of law as well.
Yeah, like preventing harm, but you think there is mileage in the economic torts bit of that as well?
Yes. Yes, certainly. I mean, I've had this conversation about setting up organisations that have or take political and legal action with regard to art with certain people in the art world. And the problem I've got is there aren't enough competent people to make setting up an organisation worthwhile. You need a team. I mean, getting money for me or where I'm sitting isn't that hard. You just ask for it. And if you can show that you're capable of taking action and being a productive use of someone's money, you're probably going to get it. So these organisations could be set up and they probably would do good. But the issue is the victories that the Free Speech Union and other similar organisations have won are only on a proportionality basis, which is better than nothing. And it is possible that we can, by using strategic lawsuits, we can protect ourselves as an interest group and get better treatment from the state.
When you say an interest group, as in you're thinking of like multiple interest groups depending on what the group is around. Is that what you mean? Like, so it could be a parents group or a local businesses group or a
okay. Yeah. So in the case of Oxford, if you got people well organised, local business owners, and to fund legal cases and organise, they'd probably have a much easier time winning proportionality-based victories with the council.
Can you elaborate slightly on proportionality-based victories and what do you mean, like some small victories that would sort of mount up to sort of chipping away at the edifice, if you like?
Yeah, so when I mean proportionality-based victories, you're winning on a proportionality basis. So I'll use the Harry Miller case, for example. Non-crime hate incidents at the time of that case were required by law. However, they went too far in the case of Harry Miller. So that's a proportionality-based victory. And the guidance that the College of Policing had issued didn't have proportionate protections for freedom of speech. But new guidance was issued, and non-crime hate incidents are still required by law for the police to do. So that's what a proportionality-based victory is.
Yeah,
it makes things
I'm clearer now what you mean. Yeah.
It makes things better than they were. However, it doesn't get rid of the system and the structure that we are diametrically opposed to.
No, and ultimately, as long as that structure still exists, a little bit like a balloon that can be sort of blown up, it's there and can be made bigger again, can't it? Less proportionate, if you like, if you take your eye off the ball again.
This is why organisation means oligarchy, because you need organisations to stem the flow and protect themselves. So I certainly think having interest group based organisations is the way forward, because the Muslim community have done this really well in areas.
So I think we need to take a big leaf out of their book.
Yes, we do. I mean, the Muslims are very good because they will have someone representing them and representing their interests, either on the council or advising the council, the police, and that type of thing. And that's why they have been able to get away with a lot. And my Catholic group, my Catholic Bible study group, were talking about this. And we were saying, okay, well, how do we advance our interests?
Well,
why don't we set up a party?
I think the Islamic community has one massive advantage over the sort of the Christians and other groups, and that is, well, something that we probably can't mention on this.
No, we won't mention that.
No, but I think you probably know what I mean. And it rhymes with.
I know what it rhymes with.
It rhymes with pets. Yeah, anyway.
Yes. I mean, that group in particular is very good. If we were half as good at them as they are at protecting our interests, we'd be treated better by the state. But for me, I'm all for organising politically, but I would want support and to make it so my interests are not directly aligned with the UK. So I'm diversifying geographically, and I would encourage others to look into that, because at the end of the day, you only have a certain amount of time on earth until you die and face judgment. So it's much better, and for protecting your family, for you to look into homeschooling, look into sending your kids to an international boarding school if you can afford it, and that type of thing. That's the only way of protecting yourself, is to be geographically diverse in the short and medium term.
Not everyone can be, and I guess I'm very mindful of the fact that I know it would be easy to look after my own interests, but also it's not very sort of civically minded. And
you should look after your own interests.
No,
because...
I know, but also I love my country and I don't want to see it go down the pan. And
yes, but you can't stop it from going down the pan in the short to medium term. I'm not saying don't take action to better the situation. However, you can take some kind of action that is worthwhile and also protect yourself in the short, medium term, because
we are actually looking at those sort of what you call sort of nomad visa things.
Yeah.
Yeah, in the next couple, once we paid our mortgage off here, which is going to be a couple of years away, we're looking into that. I think Portugal seemed quite good.
Oh, I love Portugal.
Yeah.
You know that big rock that the castle's on?
Oh.
That's one of the best sport climbing routes in the world, or one of the most famous. And it's
Oh, do you climb?
Oh yeah, I'm mad. I'm a climbing
Oh, are
junkie.
you? I'm not a climber. I'm not a climber at all. I've got a really bad thing with heights. I get terrible. I get vertigo at the top of the stairs in our
Oh
house.
goodness gracious me!
It's got worse. I like to dive. I'm a diver.
Oh, brilliant! That's a cool hobby.
Huh?
Because that's a cool hobby. Because I've got epilepsy, no one will teach me how to dive.
Ah, well, I can kind of see. Yeah, I can see why. Because, well, you know, you sort of oxygen and it's quite important when you're down there. Oh, well, yeah. I don't know much about. Do you know anybody that's got epilepsy who dives? Who can?
No one will teach them. I want to learn how to paraglide as well because I'm a soloist.
I'd love to do that. Absolutely. I think I'd love to do that, which sounds really weird for somebody that gets vertigo. But
Yeah,
I'm fine in a plane. I'm absolutely fine in a plane. It's just if I'm standing on something and I'm looking down, it's yeah, that's not good.
Yeah. Right. Shall we continue
We're
on?
slightly diverted, haven't we?
Yes.
We've got 10 minutes.
Hobbies.
What do you want to end with, William? I think it's been a really good and interesting chat.
Yeah, I'll just outline what people can do in terms of taking action. So we've talked about schools. Complain, make organised complaints. If you can and you have time, try and get on the board of governors of the school, because then you have some say, and you can certainly win proportionality-based victories from that position.
Also look at in loco parentis and what it means. And yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So that's how...
What did you say, safeguarding?
Yeah, safeguarding. And if you can, homeschool your kids or send them to a faith school, because faith schools have more protection in terms of what they can and cannot teach schools.
Having been a teacher at a church school, I can't say that they are always particularly good at upholding Christian values.
Yes, I mean, you need to send them to a good one, but generally within the legislation that SRE is mandated by, there is power for schools to...
There's wiggle room, isn't there?
Yeah, if they're a faith school.
I get that, yeah.
But if it was me, I would either send my children to an international boarding school in somewhere like the Middle East or the Far East, because that nonsense just isn't tolerated over there.
No.
Or I'd have my kids homeschooled.
Yeah.
Either by their mother or a tutor that I hire.
Yes. Back to governors and governesses, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
Certainly. I mean, I know someone who was homeschooled by their governess, and they're very clever.
Yeah, I can see governesses becoming quite a big thing again. Anyway, so that's schools, and what was was there something else?
Complaints. Make complaints. So I don't want to talk about the turf stuff too much, but if you're in a building that is owned by the local council and it has gender neutral toilets, write an official complaint and keep escalating it.
See, the issue with that is I've read far too many comments from people who have used writing to their local councillors, and they either get a cut and paste response, or
I'm not saying write to your councillor.
Or they're ignored, completely ignored.
I'm saying write and make an official complaint to the council, because by law they have to respond to that.
Right. Okay. Can they not? I mean, there are also situations where they've termed someone who's been persistent as being vexatious, and that seems to let the council off the hook for any.
Yeah, if that is the case, complain to the council's ombudsman. So if they ignore your official complaint, complain to their ombudsman, who is independent. Normally, an ombudsman will be a barrister or a judge who's taken up that role. Right. Sometimes it doesn't necessarily mean that. And make sure that you complain politely using the official process. And
if they decide that you are are turned into a vexatious resident, whatever it is, whatever the term is, what then?
Well, it depends what you mean. I mean, they shouldn't be doing that.
No, they shouldn't be. They shouldn't be doing a lot of things.
Yes, they shouldn't be doing that. So I would complain to the ombudsman if they're refusing to listen to you, and then the ombudsman should deal with it.
Right. Okay. Anything else? We've got 5 minutes.
Yes. So in terms of complaints, make complaints, and also look into getting some kind of extra legal insurance, because you may be able to get insurance on your house that covers nuisance and property disputes, planning cases. But
okay,
it will depend on your insurance policy. So what I would do also is go along to planning meetings and planning consultations, and if there's something you don't want being built in your area, object.
Yes. Yeah. I know that's, yeah. Okay.
That it won't work all the time, but if you can make it so expensive and such a headache to do something in your area, they'll find somewhere else.
Yeah.
Improve your public speaking skills.
Make it really expensive.
Yeah, improve your public speaking skills. I'm a public speaking tutor. So if you can afford to hire me, I will be more than happy to tutor individuals or groups of people on public speaking skills. So email me at reactionaryreadinglaw@gmail.com, or you can email me or message me on Twitter. But in terms of local action and political action that you can take, that's worth it. I'd also recommend keep voting, because if you vote in the next election or any election, you can vote or write to the Electoral Commission and have your MP recalled. So that would be
as
a good
an
way.
individual, you can get that done, can you? Or does it have to be a group of you?
It has to be over, I believe it's 2% or 10%. Well, I forget the exact percentage, but you can look it up in the 2015 Recall Act, and an MP has been successfully recalled before.
Right.
What you want to do is you want to be able to recall them. And even if they get re-elected after the recall, that's still putting pressure on the government. So
it's basically letting them know that we see them, isn't it? And it's that message that we want to send.
And enough people are getting organised and resisting. So they'll normally try containment there.
Yes, of course they will. Yeah.
And that's a good thing. But you've
William,
just got
do you want to say where people can find you? So you're on Reactionary Reading Law on Twitter. You've got a Substack, haven't you, called?
Yes, Reaction Reading Law.
And you've got a video channel as well, or is it on stream on Substack?
I've tried to put my public speaking videos on Substack, but I don't know how to do it. So I'm just uploading over time all my public speaking content onto my YouTube channel, which is the same name. So there'll be videos talking about how to make a good pitch, how to make a good academic speech, that type of thing.
Great.
And as I previously said, if you need help with public speaking, please email me and I'll see what I can do.
Okay. Now, I can't remember if I got links when we did the live stream before, and whether I put links to your things after the previous live stream. I'll have a look at that. But if you send them to me anyway, and I'll put them under this video. And thank you so much for coming on again. I think it's been really, really interesting to sort of dive into. Wow, it's the shallow waters of law, really, isn't it? Because it goes so deep.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, and good luck with your diving and whatever else it is you're up to.
Climbing and judo, mainly.
Diving, that's me. Climbing and judo. That's it. And no doubt we'll speak again.
Yes.
Thank you. Thanks so much. And thanks to anybody that's listening now or is going to listen in the future. Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye. Bye.